When my husband died, his wealthy boss called me. Mrs. Parker, I found something. Please come to my office right away. Don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law. They might be in danger. When I arrived, I froze at the sight of the man standing at the door. I'm glad you're here, he said in a deep voice. Follow my story until the end and tell me in the comments from which city you're watching. That way I'll know how far my story has reached. I never thought that after 45 years of marriage, I would feel like a stranger in my own life. But there I was, sitting in the front row at Robert's funeral, while my son David and my daughter-in-law Natalie made every decision as if I didn't exist. Mom, let us handle this, David told me that morning in that condescending tone he had developed over the years. Natalie nodded beside him with that fake smile that had long become too familiar. I stayed silent. I didn't have the strength to argue. Robert had died of a heart attack 3 days earlier, so suddenly that I still couldn't fully grasp it. One moment he was having breakfast with me talking about the garden he wanted to plant in the spring, and the next I found him collapsed in the garage. I looked around at the people filling the church. Robert's co-workers, neighbors, a few distant relatives. Everyone came up to David and Natalie to offer condolences, as if they were the ones who had lost a spouse. I was just a 68-year-old woman who supposedly needed to be protected from the emotional blow. Grandma is very fragile, I overheard Natalie whisper to someone. David and I are taking care of everything. Fragile. That word hurt more than any empty condolence. Robert had never seen me as fragile. To him I was Helen, his partner, his equal. But since David married Natalie 5 years ago, everything had gradually changed. During the service I noticed something strange. David seemed more relieved than sad. Whenever someone came to comfort him, he responded with a calmness that bordered on indifference. Natalie, on the other hand, had tears in her eyes, but something about her expression looked calculated, as if she were performing. After the burial, at the house Robert and I had shared for so many years, people gathered for the lunch that Natalie had organized. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching my daughter-in-law direct everything as if it were her own home. Helen, you should rest, she suggested, handing me a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. It's been a long day for you. I'm fine here, I said, though my voice sounded weaker than I intended. David came over and sat on the sofa across from me. Mom, Natalie and I have been talking. We don't think you should stay in this house alone. It's too big for you. The words froze me. What are you talking about? I asked. Well, David continued, exchanging a glance with Natalie, there are very nice retirement homes where you'd be safer. People your age, activities. I'm not going to any retirement home, I said, feeling indignation give me strength I didn't know I still had. Natalie sat beside me and took my hand with unbearable softness. It's not a retirement home, Helen. They're beautiful retirement communities and we could visit you every weekend. This is my house, I murmured, though my resolve was already crumbling under their pitying looks. The conversation was interrupted by the ringing phone. David got up to answer and from the kitchen I could hear his voice, though not the exact words. When he returned, his expression had changed. It was someone from Dad's office, he said, visibly annoyed. They wanted to talk to you about some papers. What papers? I asked. I don't know. I told them you weren't feeling well, that they could handle everything with me. Something in his tone bothered me. David, your father worked 30 years at that company. If they need to talk to me, I have a right to hear it. Mom, don't worry about those things, he replied. We'll handle all the paperwork and legal matters. That night, after everyone left and David and Natalie finally let me be alone, I sat on the bed I had shared with Robert for so many years. The house was too quiet, full of memories that now felt distant. Then my cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Mrs. Parker? Said a man's voice on the other end. Yes, who is this? This is Mr. Alan Carter, your husband's boss at the law firm. Of course I remember your name, I replied. Robert had mentioned his boss many times, always with respect. Ma'am, I'm very sorry for your loss. Robert was an extraordinary man and everyone at the office valued him deeply. Thank you, I murmured. There was a pause and then his voice turned more serious. Mrs. Parker, I need to see you urgently. There's something you must know about the last months of your husband's life. My heart began to pound. What kind of thing? I can't talk over the phone. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning? And please don't tell your son or daughter-in-law about this conversation. Robert was very specific about that. The air caught in my lungs. Why? What's going on? Please, Mrs. Parker, come tomorrow at 10 a.m. Your husband asked me to contact you if anything ever happened to him. I should speak with you, but only with you. The line went dead and I sat there in the dark holding the phone with trembling hands. Robert had foreseen his death. He had left specific instructions, and for some reason those instructions included keeping David and Natalie out of it. For the first time since his death, I felt my husband speaking to me from somewhere far away, telling me to pay attention, that it was not the time to be fragile. Something was terribly wrong and I was the only one who could uncover it. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a clear purpose. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy blue suit that Robert always said made me look elegant and strong. David called early as he had done since the funeral. How did you sleep, Mom? Natalie and I were thinking maybe you should stay with us for a few days. I'm fine, son, I replied, trying to sound normal. Actually, I have to go out this morning. Go out where? He asked. My mind worked quickly. To the pharmacy. I ran out of my blood pressure pills. I can bring you the pills, he said. You don't have to go out. I can drive to the pharmacy, David. I'm not an invalid. His sigh was audible through the phone. All right, but be careful. If you need anything, call us right away. I drove through downtown Seattle, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The law firm was in a 20-story glass tower that had always intimidated me a little. Robert worked on the 15th floor in the internal audit department. The receptionist guided me to the executive floor where I had never been before. Mr. Helen Carter's office was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, mahogany furniture, and an air of power that seemed to fill the room. He was a man of about 55 with perfectly combed gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He stood as I entered and I saw genuine concern in his eyes. Mrs. Parker, thank you for coming, he said. Please have a seat, Mr. Carter added. I sat down in one of the leather chairs in front of his desk, feeling as if I were stepping into unfamiliar territory. First of all, he began, I want you to know that your husband was one of our most valued employees. In 30 years, we never had a single complaint about his work. Thank you, I murmured, though something in his tone told me that was only the prelude. He walked to a file cabinet behind his desk, took out a thick folder and placed it in front of me. Mrs. Parker, during the last months of his life, Robert came to see me several times with very specific concerns. He opened the folder, revealing pages and pages of documents, handwritten notes in Robert's familiar handwriting, and what looked like photographs of other papers. Concerns about what? I asked. Mr. Carter looked me straight in the eyes. About your family. It felt as if the ground shifted beneath my feet. My family. Robert believed that your son and daughter-in-law were trying to manipulate him into making major changes to his will and bank accounts. The words made no sense at first. That's impossible. David would never. Mrs. Parker, Mr. Carter interrupted gently, did you know that in the last 8 months, Robert received multiple visits from your son and daughter-in-law, often when you weren't home? I shook my head, but something cold settled in my stomach. I know they repeatedly suggested that it would be better for you if he arranged things so that, in case something happened to him, David would have immediate legal authority over all financial and medical decisions concerning you. That can't be true, I whispered. Mr. Carter opened one of the pages and turned it toward me. It was a photocopy of a partially completed legal document. I recognized Robert's signature at the bottom, but it had been crossed out. Robert brought this to me 3 months ago, he explained. He said David had pressured him to sign it, assuring him it was best for the family and would protect you from having to make difficult decisions if something happened to him. I read the first lines of the document. It was a power of attorney that would have given David full control over all our finances and medical decisions concerning me, in case Robert died or became incapacitated. But he didn't sign it, I noted. No, Mr. Carter replied, and that's exactly what started to worry him. According to Mr. Carter, when Robert refused to sign, David became very upset. He told his father he was being selfish and not thinking about what was best for me. My mind began connecting dots I didn't want to see. I remembered David and Natalie's visits over the past year, how they always seemed to whisper about something whenever I entered the room. There's more, Mr. Carter continued, turning to another page. Robert also told me that Natalie had started hinting that you were showing signs of confusion, of memory loss. What? I asked, incredulous. Apparently, she began telling both Robert and David that you repeated stories, forgot conversations, that maybe you needed closer medical supervision. It felt like a physical blow. No, my memory is perfectly fine. Robert knew that. That's why he started documenting everything, Mr. Carter explained. Every conversation, every suggestion, every bit of pressure he felt from them. He turned several more pages, showing me detailed notes in Robert's handwriting, dates, times, transcripts of conversations. My husband had kept a meticulous record of what now looked like a deliberate campaign to undermine his trust in me and gain control over our lives. Why didn't he tell me anything? I asked, feeling tears I didn't know I had. He told me he didn't want to worry you until he was completely sure of what was happening. He hoped he was wrong, Mr. Carter replied calmly. Just then there was a loud knock on the office door. Both Mr. Carter and I turned, and my heart stopped when I saw who walked in. David and Natalie stood in the doorway, their faces a mix of surprise and something darker. "Mom," David said in a tone I had never heard from him before, "what are you doing here?" Natalie stepped forward, wearing that condescending smile I now recognized as a mask. "Helen, we were so worried when we couldn't find you at home. Why didn't you tell us you were coming here?" Mr. Carter rose slowly, tension visible in every line of his body. "Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, I wasn't expecting to see you today." "Well," David said, stepping fully into the office as if he belonged there. "When Mom didn't answer the phone, we got worried, given her mental state lately." "My mental state is perfectly fine," I said, finding my voice again. Natalie came closer and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Of course it is, dear, but after losing Robert, we all understand you might be a bit confused." I looked at the open folder in front of me, then at Mr. Carter, and finally at my son and daughter-in-law. For the first time in months, I saw the situation with complete clarity. "I'm not confused," I said, closing the folder firmly. "In fact, I think I'm beginning to understand exactly what's been going on." The silence that followed was so tense it could be cut with a knife. And in that silence, I knew my life was about to change in ways I had never imagined. The tension in the room was palpable. David and Natalie looked at me with a new kind of intensity, as if, for the first time, they saw me as a real threat rather than a helpless old woman. "Mom," David said, approaching slowly, "I think we should go home. Clearly you're upset, and after the funeral—" "I'm not going anywhere," I replied with a firmness that even surprised me. Mr. Carter cleared his throat. "David, Natalie, this is a private conversation between your mother and me. I'd appreciate it if you respected that." Natalie let out a forced laugh. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, Helen has been very fragile since Robert's death. We don't think it's appropriate for her to make important decisions without family supervision." "Family supervision?" I repeated, feeling my anger rise. "I'm 68 years old, not a child." David exchanged a glance with Natalie, the same one they'd shared at the funeral, filled with a meaning I hadn't understood at the time. "Of course you're not a child, Mom," David said, but in the same tone someone would use with a misbehaving one. "We just want to protect you from people who might take advantage of your grief." I looked at Mr. Carter, who remained silent, watching the scene with a serious expression. Then I looked at the closed folder on his desk, knowing it contained information that would change everything. "Mr. Carter, could you give us a few minutes to speak privately with my son and daughter-in-law?" He nodded. "Of course. I'll be right outside." When he left, the air in the room completely changed. David visibly relaxed as if he had just won something important. Mom, I don't know what that man's been telling you, but you have to understand, people will do anything when there's money involved. Money? I asked. Natalie sat down in the chair beside me. Helen, we know Robert had a considerable life insurance policy, and with the house and his savings, there are unscrupulous people who take advantage of widows. Something cold settled in my stomach. How do you two know about Robert's life insurance? David and Natalie exchanged uneasy looks. Well, David said, hesitating for the first time, Dad mentioned it a few months ago when we were talking about making sure you'd be taken care of if anything happened to him. Strange, I said slowly, because Robert never mentioned those conversations to me. Silence stretched between us. Then I heard a sound that stopped my world completely, a cough, one I would recognize anywhere. The three of us turned toward the door of the private bathroom connected to Mr. Carter's office. The door opened slowly and a figure appeared that made my heart stop and then race so hard I thought it might burst. Robert, my husband, the man I had buried 4 days ago, was standing there, alive, breathing, looking at me with a mixture of love and apology in his eyes. Hello, Helen, he said softly. I think I screamed, I'm not sure. What I do remember is that the world started spinning around me, and if Robert hadn't run toward me, I would have fallen off the chair. What? How? I whispered, touching his face with trembling hands to make sure he was real. Behind us, I heard Natalie let out a gasp and David mutter a word I'd rather not repeat. Robert held me carefully. His familiar hands steadied me, just as they had for 45 years. I'm sorry, my love. I'm so sorry I had to put you through this, but it was the only way. The only way for what? I asked, though part of me was already starting to understand. Robert looked at David and Natalie, and his expression hardened like I'd never seen before. The only way to protect you from them. David found his voice first. This is impossible. You're dead. I saw you. There was a funeral. There's a death certificate. Robert straightened, keeping a protective arm around me. There was a forged death certificate, arranged with the help of a discreet doctor and a funeral director who owed a few favors. Mr. Carter helped me organize everything. But why? I whispered. Robert looked at me tenderly and then turned back to David and Natalie. Because I found out what you were planning. Natalie went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. No, said Robert, walking to the desk and opening the folder Mr. Carter had closed. Then you don't recognize this? He pulled out several documents and placed them on the desk. Even from where I sat, I could see copies of emails, text messages, and what looked like transcripts of recordings. David, Robert read aloud, Mom is starting to show signs of dementia. I think you should consider that she might soon need full-time care. If Dad signs the papers I prepared, we can make sure she gets the best possible care when the time comes. My son turned completely white. Robert continued reading. Natalie agrees, and the sooner the better. The house alone is worth almost $100,000, not counting their retirement savings. I sank into the chair as if I'd been struck. They had been planning to declare me incompetent. They had been calculating the value of our house, of our lives. This is out of context, David said desperately. We were just worried about Mom. Worried about what? Robert interrupted. About how to control her life. About declaring her incompetent and locking her away while you sold the house and spent our savings. Natalie stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous, Robert. Faking your death is a crime. There are false certificates, fraudulent documents. You're right, Robert replied calmly. I'm ready to face the consequences. But first I wanted Helen to know the truth about what you've been plotting. He came closer and took my hands. My love, for the past 8 months they've been visiting me regularly when you weren't home. At first I thought they were checking on us, but little by little I realized every conversation was designed to convince me you were losing your abilities, that you needed supervision, that it would be selfish of me not to make legal arrangements to protect you. I looked at David, my son. The baby I once held in my arms, the boy I comforted during nightmares, the man I had loved unconditionally for 35 years. Is it true? I asked him. For a moment I saw something like shame, but it quickly hardened. Mom, you don't understand the financial pressures we're under. Natalie and I have debts, obligations. So it's true, I murmured. Robert squeezed my hands. When I realized what was happening, I hired a private investigator. We discovered that David has gambling debts of over $150,000, and Natalie has been using credit cards under your name without your knowledge. The world began to spin again around me. Credit cards in my name? 3 different cards, Robert said quietly, with a total debt of $2,000. Natalie exploded. That's enough, Robert. I don't know what sick game you're playing, but it ends here. Helen, let's go. Clearly, your husband has lost his mind. But I didn't move. For the first time in months, maybe years, everything made sense. The constant visits, the exaggerated concern for my well-being, the hints about my memory, the rush to make decisions about my future right after the funeral. They weren't taking care of me. They were preparing to get rid of me. I'm not going anywhere, I finally said, my voice steadier than it had been in a long time. But I think you two should leave. The expression on David's face changed into something I had never seen before. He was no longer my concerned son. He was a stranger who had just lost something he thought was his. Robert helped me sit on the office sofa just as Mr. Carter returned with a bottle of water and a grave expression. David and Natalie stood by the door like cornered animals, deciding whether to flee or attack. Helen, Robert said softly, kneeling in front of me, there's something else you need to know. My mind was still struggling to process that my husband was alive, that he had faked his death, that my son and daughter-in-law had been planning for months to take everything from me. But something in Robert's expression told me the worst was yet to come. More. I whispered. Mr. Carter opened another section of the folder and took out what looked like a series of photographs. He placed them on the coffee table in front of us. These photos were taken by the private investigator over the past 6 weeks, Robert explained. I picked up the photographs with trembling hands. The first showed David walking into what looked like a casino. The second showed him sitting at a poker table, betting chips that represented sums I couldn't even imagine. The third showed Natalie in an upscale jewelry store, trying on a necklace that cost more than our mortgage payment. David, Robert said, his voice cold as ice. Do you want to explain to your mother how you managed to gamble $25,000 in a single night when you told me you needed help paying the mortgage? My son said nothing. I saw his jaw tighten. Robert continued. Or maybe Natalie can explain how she bought a $2,000 necklace last week when you supposedly can't make ends meet. Natalie finally spoke, her fake sweetness gone. Robert, you don't know what you're talking about. That necklace was a replica. A replica from Tiffany's? Mr. Carter asked, pulling a receipt from the folder. Because we have it right here, paid for with a credit card under Helen Parker's name. It felt like I'd been slapped. You used my name to buy jewelry? I asked. Natalie looked at me and for the first time her mask completely cracked. You don't understand, Helen. David and I are under a lot of pressure. His debts, our expenses. We just needed a little temporary help. Temporary. I repeated. How long have you been stealing from me? Robert pulled out another document. According to our investigator, the fraudulent transactions began a year and a half ago. They've used your information to open 3 credit cards, made unauthorized withdrawals from your savings account totaling $1,000, and have been intercepting your bank correspondence so you wouldn't find out. Intercepting my mail? I whispered. Do you remember when Natalie offered to help you with the mail a few months ago? Robert asked. When she said it would be easier if she handled your bills and important documents? The memory hit me like lightning. Natalie had been so kind, so helpful. Helen, dear, she had said, I know these financial things can be confusing. Why don't you let me organize everything for you? Robert works so hard and you already have enough to worry about. But that's not the worst part, Robert continued, his face even darker. What could be worse than this? I asked. Robert looked David straight in the eye. Tell your mother about the plan for the retirement home. David went completely pale. I don't know what you're talking about. No, said Mr. Carter, taking a small recorder from his desk, because we have this. He pressed play and David's voice filled the office. It was a phone call recorded without his knowledge. Natalie, we need to speed up the timeline. Dad's starting to ask questions and Mom's not acting as confused as we hoped. Then came Natalie's voice from the recorder. I already talked to the director of the retirement home. You said you have the medical documents we need. The false papers are ready. Once Mom's admitted, we can sell the house immediately. The market's good right now. It felt like falling off a cliff. False medical documents. The recording continued. What if Robert objects? Natalie asked. Robert won't be a problem for much longer, David replied, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. Robert stopped the recording and looked at me with eyes full of pain. That conversation was recorded 3 weeks ago, Helen. 3 weeks before my death. The silence in the office was unbearable. I looked at David, searching for some explanation, some reason to believe this wasn't what it seemed. Robert won't be a problem for much longer, I repeated slowly. What does that mean, David? My son finally spoke, but his voice was that of a stranger. Mom, you're misunderstanding everything. We were only worried about Dad. His blood pressure was high, he was under a lot of stress. So you're saying you expected him to die naturally? Robert asked, standing up. Natalie stepped forward, dropping every pretense. Robert, don't be dramatic. We were just being realistic about the future. Helen will need care eventually, and it's better to plan ahead. Plan ahead, or speed up the process? I said, feeling my blood boil. Mr. Carter pulled another document from the folder. Helen, this might be the hardest thing to hear. It was a medical report. I read the first lines with growing horror. Patient shows clear signs of early-stage dementia. Episodes of confusion, short-term memory loss, disorientation. Full-time care recommended. This is a lie, I said, my voice trembling. I've never seen this doctor. Dr. Stephen Collins. I don't even recognize that name. It was Natalie's doctor, Robert said. Someone willing to sign a false diagnosis in exchange for $3,000. I looked at Natalie, the woman I had called my daughter for 5 years. You paid a doctor to say I have dementia? Helen, Natalie said, and for the first time I saw real panic in her eyes. You have to understand, we were only trying to protect you. Protect me from what? I shouted, surprised by the strength of my own voice. From yourself. David yelled back. Mom, you're old. Your mind isn't what it used to be. Natalie and I can see things you can't. Robert stepped between David and me. Helen doesn't have any mental problems. The only problem here is that you two have been manipulating a 68-year-old woman for over a year, making her doubt her own reality so you could steal her money and her house. Manipulating? I asked, stunned. Yes, Mr. Carter explained. It's called gaslighting, a psychological manipulation technique where someone makes you doubt your own perception of reality. Robert sat next to me and took my hands. My love, do you remember a few months ago when you couldn't find your car keys and Natalie suggested maybe it was your memory? I nodded, remembering the anguish. We found the keys in Natalie's purse, Robert said quietly. She took them. And do you remember when you couldn't find your blood pressure medication and David said you probably forgot it? My heart began to race. Yes. It was in David's car, Robert added. One by one, Robert reminded me of situations I had taken as signs of my mental decline. The day I couldn't find my wallet, the time I arrived late to an appointment, the moments when I couldn't recall conversations I was sure I'd had. Every single one had been orchestrated. 4 months, Robert said. They've been systematically making you doubt your own mind, setting the stage to have you declared incompetent. I looked at David and Natalie, the two people I had loved and trusted most. Why? I whispered. We're family. Natalie let out a bitter laugh I had never heard before. Family, Helen? You and Robert have been an obstacle since the day we got married. Sitting in that big house, hoarding money you never use while David and I struggle every month. You never asked for help, I said weakly. We didn't want your help, David replied. We wanted what's rightfully ours. What's rightfully yours? I asked. We're your family. David shouted. That house should be ours. That money should be ours. You're going to die soon anyway. The silence that followed was absolute. In that instant I knew I had lost my son forever. The man in front of me was a stranger who had used my love against me, counting the days until my death to take everything. But I also knew something else. For the first time in over a year, my mind was clearer than ever. I wasn't confused. I didn't have dementia. I was the victim of a cruel and systematic conspiracy, planned by the two people I had trusted most. And now that I knew the truth, I would never be the same again. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster I'll never forget. Robert stayed in a small hotel while Mr. Carter helped us resolve the legal complications of his resurrection. I went back home, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a prisoner of my own life. David and Natalie left Mr. Carter's office that day filled with fury and shame. I didn't hear from them for 2 days, until they appeared at my door on a Wednesday morning. I saw them approaching from the living room window. David walked with that same determined stride I remembered from his childhood, when he'd done something wrong and tried to convince me it wasn't his fault. Natalie followed him, but something in her posture told me this time their plan was different. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Hi, Mom," David said, using that carefully controlled tone he always used when trying to manipulate a tense situation. "David." "Natalie." My voice sounded colder than I intended, but I didn't try to soften it. "Can we come in?" Natalie asked. "We need to talk." I let them in but didn't invite them to sit. We remained standing in the living room that had once hosted so many happy family gatherings, and now felt like a battlefield. "Mom," David began, "we've been thinking a lot about what happened at the office." "I'm sure you have," I replied calmly. Natalie stepped forward. "Helen, I think there have been a lot of misunderstandings. Yes, David and I have been worried about your well-being, but everything we did was with the best intentions." "The best intentions?" I repeated. "Like using my name to open credit cards?" "Those cards were for emergencies," David said quickly. "Expenses that could come up related to your care, like a $2,000 necklace." Natalie sighed. "All right, I made a mistake. But Helen, you have to understand the pressure we've been under. David's debts, our expenses." "Their debts aren't my responsibility," I said, surprised by how easy those words were to say. David changed tactics. "Mom, Dad's manipulating you. Don't you think it's strange that he faked his own death? What kind of man does that?" "The kind of man who tries to protect his wife from a son who planned to steal everything from her," I answered. "We weren't stealing." David exploded. "That house, that money, they were going to be ours anyway. We were just trying to speed things up because we needed help." The brutal honesty of his words left me speechless. "David, are you saying you've been waiting for Robert and me to die so you could take our money?" "That's not how it sounds," Natalie interrupted desperately. "All families plan for the future. Families don't plan to declare their parents incompetent with fake medical diagnoses," I replied coldly. Natalie turned pale. That was just a precaution in case you really needed care later on." "A precaution you paid $3,000 for?" I asked sharply. David ran his hands through his hair. A sign I knew well, the sign that meant he was losing his temper. "Mom, listen to yourself. You've become paranoid. Dad's filling your head with crazy ideas." "Crazy ideas?" I repeated, raising my voice. "Like the idea that I have the right to live in my own house without anyone trying to declare me insane?" "No one's trying to call you insane," David shouted back. I walked toward the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "What are you doing?" Natalie asked nervously. "Calling Robert," I said. "I think he should be here for this conversation." "Mom, don't," David began, but it was too late. Robert arrived 20 minutes later. He had probably been waiting for my call, knowing this moment would come. The tension in the room became unbearable the second he stepped inside. "David." "Natalie." He greeted them in a neutral tone. "Dad," David said quickly, "we need to resolve this as a family." Robert sat beside me on the couch, taking my hand naturally as he always had. "I'm listening," he said calmly. Natalie sat across from us, adopting her most vulnerable posture, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "Robert, I know what we did looks terrible, but you have to understand, we were desperate. Explain that desperation, Robert said evenly. David spoke fast, words tumbling out as if he had practiced them in front of a mirror. The debts piled up faster than we expected. I know it was stupid, but I thought I could win the money back quickly. When that failed, we panicked. So you decided to steal from your parents? Robert asked. That's not stealing. David shouted. You have more money than you'll ever use. That house is too big for just the two of you. Speeding up your inheritance by declaring me incompetent? I asked, my voice like ice. Natalie burst into tears. Not the tears of remorse, but the calculated kind I had seen too many times before. Helen, we never wanted to hurt you. We just wanted to make sure you were taken care of, and that we could pay our debts. You thought you could do both by stealing my money and locking me away in a retirement home? I said. It wasn't a retirement home, David objected quickly. It's a beautiful retirement community. You would have been comfortable there. Against my will? I asked. You would have adjusted eventually, Natalie murmured, staring at the floor. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Even they seemed to realize how monstrous their words sounded when spoken aloud. Robert rose slowly, his expression calm but final. David, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm going to say. My son lifted his head, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the child he once was, the one who used to run into my arms after scraping his knee. Your mother and I have decided that you're no longer part of our lives, Robert said firmly, without hesitation. We don't want to see you, we don't want to hear from you, and we absolutely don't want you to have access to our finances or our property. David shot up from his chair. You can't do that. I'm your son. You're my biological son, Robert replied coldly, but you stopped being my family the day you decided our deaths would be more convenient for you than our lives. Natalie stood too, her tears instantly gone. This is ridiculous, Robert. Helen, you can't just cut us off. We're family. No, I said, standing beside Robert. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't make their loved ones question their own sanity. Family doesn't count the days until someone dies to take their money. David stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, an ugly mixture of rage and disdain. You know what, Mom? Maybe you're right. Maybe this is for the best, because I'm tired of pretending I care when all I've ever wanted is for you to get out of the way. His words hit me like a slap, but they also freed me. In that moment, all the guilt, all the love, all the hope that this had been some misunderstanding vanished completely. Leave, I said simply. Pack your things and get out of my house. Gladly, David snapped. But this isn't over. We'll fight. We'll prove that Dad faked his death and that you're not mentally fit to make decisions. Robert smiled, a sharp, humorless smile. Go ahead, he said. And when you do, make sure you explain to the judge why you plan to declare your mother incompetent using false medical documents. I'm sure he'll find that very interesting. David and Natalie exchanged a glance, and I saw panic flicker in their eyes as they realized there was no way out. This isn't over, David muttered, though his voice no longer carried any conviction. Yes, it is, I said quietly. It ends right here. I watched them leave, knowing it was probably the last time I would ever see my son. I should have felt sadness, but all I felt was a deep, pure relief. For the first time in more than a year, I was free. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the porch of our new house, watching Robert plant roses in the garden he always dreamed of having. We moved to a small town 3 hours away, where no one knows our story and where we can simply be Robert and Helen, a retired couple enjoying their golden years. The transition wasn't easy at first. There were moments, especially during the first few weeks, when I'd wake up in the middle of the night wondering if we'd done the right thing. Cutting David off completely felt like amputating a part of myself, no matter how diseased that part had become. But Robert always reminded me why we did it. My love, he would say when he found me crying late at night, you can't save someone who's willing to destroy you. Mr. Carter helped us handle all the legal complications. The falsified death certificate resulted in some fines and community service for Robert. But when the evidence of David and Natalie's conspiracy was presented, the judge was surprisingly understanding. I've seen many cases of financial abuse against the elderly, he said during the hearing, but rarely one as systematic and cruel as this. David and Natalie tried to carry out their threat to fight in court, but their case collapsed as soon as the district attorney decided to investigate the fraudulent credit cards and forged medical documents. In the end, they were the ones who faced criminal charges, not us. The last I heard, David was serving 18 months of probation for financial fraud, and Natalie had lost her nursing license. They divorced 6 weeks after everything came to light, blaming each other for dragging one another into such a desperate situation. I don't feel satisfaction over their downfall. What I feel is a strange sense of closure, like finishing a book that once kept you restless and finally being able to put it down. We sold the big house where we had raised David. It was too full of painful memories, and to be honest, they were right about one thing. It was far too big for 2 people. With the money from the sale, we bought this smaller house in a quiet town, with enough land for Robert's garden and a view of the mountains that makes every sunrise feel like a gift. We also paid off all the debts David and Natalie had created in our name. Not because we owed it, but because we wanted to start this new chapter completely clean with no financial ties to the past. Do you think David will ever understand what he did? I asked Robert one evening as we prepared dinner. Robert stopped chopping vegetables and looked at me with the same wise eyes I fell in love with 46 years ago. I don't know, my love, he said, but it's no longer our responsibility to teach him. That's been the hardest lesson of all these months. For 35 years, I felt responsible for David's happiness and well-being. Even after he became an adult, even after he got married, he was still my baby, the one who needed protection and guidance. But some adults choose paths their parents can't follow, and sometimes the truest love is knowing when to let go. Here we've made new friends. Linda and Henry Brooks, the couple next door, invited us to dinner last week. During the meal, Linda mentioned that they had cut ties with their son 10 years ago. He was an addict, she said simply. Every time we tried to help him, he dragged us back into his chaos. In the end, we had to choose between saving our marriage and our sanity, or continuing to be victims of his destruction. Was it very hard? I asked. Henry took Linda's hand. The hardest decision of our lives, he said, and also the one that saved us. I didn't realize until that moment how much I needed to hear that we weren't the only parents forced into such an extreme choice. That morning, Robert brought me coffee in bed, a habit of our new life. As I took the first sip, I saw a letter on the nightstand. What's that? I asked. It came yesterday. It's from David. My heart skipped a beat. Did you read it? No. It's not for me. I held the letter for several minutes before opening it. The handwriting was the same as in all those Mother's Day cards, but the words were from a stranger. Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something. Natalie and I divorced. She blames everything on my gambling debts, but I know the truth is more complicated. He went on to say that he was in therapy, trying to understand how he could have conspired against his own parents. The therapist says I have entitlement issues. I've always felt like I deserved things without earning them. At the end he wrote, I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I understand what I did and I understand why you had to walk away from me. If you ever decide to give me another chance, I'll be working to become the person I should have always been. When I finished reading, I handed the letter to Robert. What do you think? He asked after a pause. That it sounds like someone trying to change, I said honestly. But words are easy. Robert nodded. And what do you want to do? Nothing, I said, surprising even myself with how certain I felt. I just want to keep living our life. And if one day he proves through actions that he's changed, maybe we'll reconsider. And if he never does. I looked out the window at the garden, where the roses Robert had planted were beginning to bloom. Then we'll live a beautiful life without him. That afternoon, while Robert worked in the garden, I decided to write my own letter. Not for David, but for myself. A kind of declaration of independence from the guilt I had carried for too long. Dear Helen, 68 years old. Forgive yourself for loving so much it almost cost you everything. Forgive yourself for trusting so deeply it almost cost you your sanity. Forgive yourself for believing that family love is always unconditional. But also celebrate yourself. When you saw the truth, you had the courage to act. You chose your own life over everyone else's comfort. That night, as Robert and I got ready for bed in our new room overlooking the mountains, he asked, "Do you regret anything?" Cutting him off completely. "No," I said without hesitation. "Not even for not seeing the signs earlier?" "Sometimes. And for faking my death," he joked. I smiled. It was dramatic but effective. Robert laughed. "Definitely effective." We stayed silent, listening to the quiet sounds of the night in our new home. "You know what's strange?" I said at last. "What?" "I feel younger now than I did at 50, as if I've set down a weight I didn't even know I was carrying." Robert took my hand in the dark. "That's what happens when you stop living for everyone else and start living for yourself." This morning Linda, our neighbor, called. "Helen, a few of us are going to the local market on Saturday and then planning to have lunch at that new French cafe. Would you like to come?" "I'd love to," I answered without hesitation. A year ago, I would have had to ask David and Natalie first, make sure they didn't need anything, ask if it was appropriate for a woman my age to go out with friends. Now I simply say yes to what makes me happy. As I write these lines, sitting on the porch with my cup of tea and listening to Robert whistle while watering his roses, I realize it's the first time in decades that I feel completely free. Free from guilt, from expectations, from the need to justify my choices to people who never had my best interest at heart. David was right about one thing. Robert and I probably don't have many years left. But the years we do have will be ours. Lived in our own way, surrounded by people who love us without conditions or hidden agendas. And that, I've learned, is worth far more than any toxic family bond one left behind. Sometimes the greatest freedom comes from the courage to walk into the unknown, even if it means leaving behind those you once loved, when love has become indistinguishable from harm. Tonight I'll sleep deeply for the first time in 2 years, knowing that tomorrow I'll wake up in a life that is entirely my own. If this story touched your heart, support us by clicking like and subscribing to the channel. New stories are already waiting for you on your screen.